So,
What's the page number?
okay. I'm just going to cover the scroll while I do the Torah, so please sit.
I think you need more microphone.
From childhood, I've always loved stories about animals and mythology, and combining the two was, of course, my favourite type of tale. Many creation stories fit the bill, but not the one we know and love from Torah. In this story, there are no competing powers, dragons or sea monsters. There is only one God who calmly and methodically creates everything, from the greatest sea creatures to the smallest creeping things, both in the sea and on the land. And also the heavenly bodies, which in many ancient religions feature as gods or goddesses in their own right. In our version, all is created simply by the power of God's voice. Or is it that God thinks it and creates it through the power of thought? The Hebrew says, Vayomer Elohim, God said. Vaya'as Elohim, God made. And Vayivra Elohim, God created. Vahi chen, and it was so. But in this story, we have no idea of how it actually happened. As we believe God is incorporeal and does not have a physical body, all this language is, of course, allegorical. However, we understand that God has a plan and made it happen in six apparently simple steps. Simple for God, that is. Of course, our world is amazingly complex and only a tiny part of the universe. But this is a story to help us understand something which, even given the scientific knowledge we have today, is actually mind-blowing and incredibly amazing. It is just one way of describing the Jewish belief that God is the ultimate creator and how everything is part of a magnificent design, which we ourselves are part of. We can see in this simple description a design which involves intricate ecosystems, all of which are linked and dependent on one another. Although humankind is created last, and in the traditional translation of the Hebrew, is given control and mastery of the earth and everything on it, this is a huge responsibility and requires us to care for the earth and not abuse it. Sadly, humankind has massively failed in this responsibility since the Industrial Revolution, and especially in recent years. Today, we have many worries, perhaps the least of which is that COVID is still a threat. Perhaps for some, the most worrying is how we will pay our bills in the current cost of living crisis. For some, the most worrying thing is Putin's war and whether he will be crazy enough to use the devastating atomic weapons available to him. For some, it is the climate emergency. For some, it is just how will they find their next meal. Today is a day of celebration, so I don't want to dwell at any length on these problems. However, I will mention two related things. Today is World Food Day, a day that aims to unite 150 countries in fighting global hunger. As we know, even in the UK, there are people who are struggling to feed their families and rely on food bank donations. We need to build a sustainable world where everyone, everywhere, has regular access to enough nutritious food. A sustainable world requires sustainable choices, which each of us can make every time we shop. You may like to look up the World Food Day website for more information about how you can do this. I must also draw your attention to a recent report by the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Their Living Planet report for 2022 tells us that according to their evidence, after studying wildlife populations of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles and fish across the globe since 1970, overall, the wildlife population of our planet has decreased by 69% in the last 50 years. This is surely shocking and distressing, not just to me and other animal lovers, but to anyone who understands our place on this planet and how important biodiversity is, and how all ecosystems are interdependent, and how we rely on them for food and medicine. The report has many shocking statistics. For example, the highest decline was reported in Latin American and Caribbean region. A massive 94%, yes, 94% decline in wildlife populations in the last 50 years. Also, freshwater species globally have reduced by 84%. The WWF concludes that the planet is experiencing a biodiversity and climate crisis, and that this is our fault. They also suggest ways to change this around, saying that a nature-positive future needs transformative, game-changing shifts in how we produce, how we consume, how we govern, and what we finance. So please do read this report, or at least a summary of its findings, and urge our government to take it seriously. If we do not, we will continue to fail in the role God gave us in his grand design. And furthermore, we will ultimately bring about our own extinction. Maybe that is what the planet needs in order to eventually recover. However, that is not what we want for our children, is it? Let us resolve to do all we can to ensure our planet survives and thrives in the next 50 years, and truly celebrate the wonderful biodiversity and beauty of the world God created.